have real blood, proven scientifically. We have an image that's neither painted, nor photographed, nor scorched, nor rubbed, or in any way made by the hand of a man. A piece of cloth that contains an image with physical properties unlike any other image I have ever seen, or anyone has ever seen.
Was revealed in even more detailed relief in 2005, when it was transformed into a three-dimensional image.
The thing that stopped me from accepting the shroud as authentic for years, 18 years, the blood on the shroud is still red. All blood should be black or brown. And no one could answer for 18 years, why is the blood on the shroud still red? Dr. Alan Adler, Jewish blood chemist, who proved, by the way, the blood on the shroud was blood, proved it. He and I were on the telephone, and then he told me something. The body goes into shock. Jesus was given no water, he was beaten, he was scourged. Consequently, he went into anaphylactic shock. After a period of time in this type of shock, the cell walls of the red blood cells begin to break down, floods the body, the bloodstream, with an enzyme called bilirubin. And when that happens, the blood stays red forever. His face was beaten. And you can actually see one cheek is more swollen than the other. There are scourge marks from a Roman flagrum, which was a whip, and his body is covered with these scourge marks, over 120. The bloodstains on the shroud show crucifixion through the wrist, because the Romans knew if they crucified in the palm, you could tear it loose. But if they nail you here, and the nail comes here, you could never pull this loose. I also see bloodstains covering his head, as if from a cap or crown of thorns. And we see a wound on his side.
The Shroud of Turin is a burial cloth that shows a man that was scourged, crowned with thorns, crucified, and pierced with a lance. The first reason I believe this is the burial cloth of Jesus are due to the new studies that provide an updated age for the shroud. In 1988, the carbon dating results provided a date in the 1300s. This made many people believe it was a forgery for decades. However, in the early 2000s, Ray Rogers was challenged to look into this further. Here's what he said.
I had given up on the shroud, and this was about the same time that the lunatic fringe were coming up with an infinite number of ways the date could be wrong, and this was just the last straw.
I got a call from Ray, and he goes, "This is nonsense. I can prove these people wrong in 5 minutes." And I said, "Well, Ray, go for it."
So I read their paper, and I thought, I've got the samples that can shoot that full of holes. So I got out the Ross samples, and I got out the shroud samples, and I went to work again.
He discovered that the wrong samples were selected for the dating. He concluded the radiocarbon sample was thus not part of the original cloth and was invalid for determining the age of the shroud. He also calculated a new date between 1300 and 3000 years old. Again, this is from a well-rated, published peer-reviewed journal. What he believes happened is this.
If you happen to hit a place where a yarn segment from the original shroud was spliced into the new reweave part, the splice very definitely shows the new yarn that was being put in and dyed to match. The only thing in the shroud that was dyed or stained was this radiocarbon area.
His findings were confirmed by John Brown from Georgia Tech and Bob Villarreal from Los Alamos National Laboratory. I've received many comments that say that Wikipedia disagrees with the findings of Ray Rogers, so we should ignore it. However, I would recommend looking into the sources, as they even mention that the date may be incorrect. The carbon-14 date has led many people to believe that this is not the burial cloth of Jesus, although it's amazing that someone from the actual Shroud of Turin research project wrote a paper refuting that. In October 2019, an analysis of the raw data showed inconsistencies and requested a new carbon-14 date. While these are promising results, a new sample and carbon dating will be needed. The second reason is related to a March 2019 study where a replica of the Shroud of Turin was attempted. The results stated that the perfect reproduction of the Turin shroud remains a challenge since many other characteristics of the original image have not yet been obtained with any of the processes used for reproduction to date. That basically means that even with the most sophisticated technology available today, we cannot replicate the Shroud of Turin. A similar experiment was conducted in 2012, and from that experiment, we saw the amount of watts necessary to create an image with just some of the properties. It would look something like this. That was the Dallas Cowboys Stadium, with every light on 750 megawatts are used. Dr. Paolo Di Lazzaro, who led the 2012 study, told National Geographic that it would take several billion watts to create the image. Another thing to factor in is that 750 megawatts are being used throughout the stadium. What science is telling us is that a dead body would have to exude billions of watts to create the image on the shroud. No mere human could do that. But Jesus, the God-man, could. As he illuminated during the transfiguration, he surely illuminated in an even greater way during his resurrection, which is recorded on the Shroud of Turin for us. Also, it would take 10,000 of these lasers to create the image on the shroud, which exceeds the maximum power released by all ultraviolet light sources available today. That statement says it all. We don't have the capability to replicate the shroud. So every Easter, when we remember the resurrection, think about the power of Jesus. Think about that literally explosive power as he rose from the dead to create this image. It's amazing. Now you might be wondering, why can't we replicate all the characteristics of the shroud? This is due to the cloth containing a three-dimensional image. Fabrics are not supposed to contain precise 3D images. As you can see here, a three-dimensional image can be taken from this two-dimensional cloth. This three-dimensional nature inspired the Shroud of Turin research project, also known as STURP, which was the most thorough analysis of the shroud to date. The 33-person team was comprised of experts in various fields who spent 17 months preparing for the analysis. They did incredible work, and here they tested several types of images and were not able to obtain the three-dimensional style that the shroud had. To date, this three-dimensional nature could not be matched. The data from the study actually allowed the face of Christ to be modeled by the History Channel, which you'll see here, as well as this hyper-realistic replica of the shroud, which was developed over 15 years and is very impressive. The fourth reason I believe is that the Shroud of Turin matches bloodstains on the Sudarium of Oviedo. The Sudarium is the cloth that had been on Jesus' head, as mentioned in John 20:7. There was a study that compared bloodstains as well as calcium and strontium deposits between the shroud and the Sudarium. The results suggest that both cloths were used by the same person. The fifth reason I believe is due to the medical accuracy of the shroud. The examiner from the research team wrote, "The largest bloodstain on the burial cloth is on the right side of the chest. It covers the area of the fifth and sixth ribs. This stain very clearly shows separation of blood from a clear watery material." What did John's Gospel say? That after Jesus was pierced, blood and water came out. This is medically confirmed here. The examiner even states, "The author cannot help but comment that a remarkable consistency exists between the Gospel accounts and the forensic pathological findings depicted on the Shroud of Turin." Again, another reason I believe. And I think it's interesting too that the examiner states that there's a remarkable consistency between the shroud and the Gospels. The sixth reason I believe is due to the pollen studies. Max Fry used adhesive tapes to collect dust samples from the Shroud of Turin during the 1978 STURP investigation. He later classified 58 pollen grains by comparing them to pollen grains in the largest botanical museums around the world. He concluded that a majority of the pollen grains were from Jerusalem. The seventh reason I believe is due to the coins placed over the man's eyes. It was a custom to put coins over the eyes of a dead person so their eyes would stay shut while you're carrying them to their tomb. This was indicated initially by the STURP team and published in the Numismatist. This was confirmed by imaging analyst expert Robert Haralick, who said the shroud did indeed contain a faint image of the Pilate coin. So we have a man that was tortured the way Jesus was, had his side pierced, had bloodstains that matched the headcloth attributed to Jesus, had coins on his eyes that were minted by Pontius Pilate, was in Jerusalem according to pollen samples, and had an explosion of ultraviolet light to create a 3D profile of his crucified body. This has got to be Jesus. There is no natural explanation for this. The eighth reason I believe is that there is AB blood on the shroud. The blood that is on the Sudarium is also AB blood, and so is the blood from every other Eucharistic miracle. When I read that the blood on the Shroud of Turin was the same as all the Eucharistic miracles, I thought, wow, God, you are brilliant. So in conclusion, all these reasons point to the fact that faith and science do not contradict. We wouldn't have this phenomenal data without science. This is an example of God illustrating his incredible power through scientific discoveries.
And I collected about 3/4 of that little canister full of this dried blood. We had this analyzed. We put an amount of this blood in some normal saline and at body temperature, and we swirled this gently for 72 hours. When we put this in a growth medium for another 72 hours and put it under a microscope, the white blood cells were dividing. We were able to get a chromosome count. There were 24 chromosomes. 23 Christ got from Mary. He got one, which was the sex determinant, or the Y, from his heavenly Father, for a total of 24. All of us have 46. We get 23 from our mother and 23 from our father. Now, this blood, folks, was still alive after almost 2,000 years. The people that did the test thought I had pulled a fast one of some kind on them. Never in their lives have they ever seen any dried blood that was still alive.
It's a startling and unusual formation amongst the rocks below, which of course, he photographs.
When the film is developed, the captain is surprised to see what appears to be the remains of a large ship, far inland.
He may just have stumbled onto the answer, some people think, of a great biblical mystery.
God gives Noah extremely detailed instructions on how to build this ark, how many floors it should have, how many rooms, what type of wood to use, and even its exact dimensions: 515 feet long, 86 feet wide, and 51 feet tall.
Its length is exactly 30 royal cubits, which is 515 feet long, or 157 meters. Its width is larger than 50 royal cubits, which is 86 feet, or 26.21 meters. It's in the mountains of Ararat, as the Bible says. Genesis 8:4 says, "Then in the 7th month, on the 17th day of the month, the ark rested on the mountains of Ararat." Something unique seemed to appear. The Turkish government ordered a soldier to dig up the ground, and a petrified piece of wood was uncovered. Even more surprising were laboratory analysis, which not only revealed that the petrified wood contained carbon, proving it was once wood, but there were iron nails embedded in the wood.
Now, I stole this from a government website, and it's their fault, it's not the best picture in the world, but they're saying here that this is the population size over time, going all the way back to, they believe, way before the Bible says the world was created. But essentially, there's about 1 million people alive across the world for tens of thousands of years, and all of a sudden, somebody invents farming. And that means that extra population can be handled because there's more food. And all of a sudden, the population does that, and we have 7 billion people today. And how come the people with the same genes back here, who were just as smart as people here, they didn't think of planting something in the ground and harvesting it the next year? This is really magic back here.
Right.
Taking that thought, I applied that to a biblical idea, where this is the flood, this is today. And starting from those 6 people, all you have to do is double the number of people every 156 years. And you arrive at 7 billion people after 4,500 years. Just about any model that has any growth at all, you can get this many people in those many years. So the human population size actually is a biblical human population size. If evolution was true and we existed for so many thousands of years before that, there should be trillions of people. Not that it's possible.
Yeah.
Or someone should have invented farming earlier than that. Or another way to ask it is this. If 1 million people live for about 1 million years, where are the trillions of bodies?
That's a really good question.
They don't exist.
There's no bones down there.
Yeah, there are some ancient bones we found, great, but those are post-flood people. Right. There should be millions upon millions upon millions of cemeteries, old villages, and remains of people, and we don't find them. I believe it's because they didn't exist.
Which
I want you to fill in the story of the rest of the beginning of the universe. God, spiritual matter, impact on material matter.
Okay, so 2 questions. All right.
Go ahead.
All right, your question, where did God come from, assumes that you're thinking of the wrong, obviously it displays that you're thinking of the wrong God. Because the God of the Bible is not affected by time, space, or matter. If he's affected by time, space, or matter, he's not God. Time, space, and matter is what we call a continuum. All of them have to come into existence at the same instant. Because if there were matter but no space, where would you put it? If there were matter and space but no time, when would you put it? You cannot have time, space, or matter independently. They have to come into existence simultaneously. The Bible answers that in 10 words. In the beginning, there's time. God created the heaven, there's space, and the earth, there's matter. So you have time, space, matter created a trinity of trinities there. Just, time is past, present, future. Space has length, space has length, width, height. Matter has solid, liquid, gas. You have a trinity of trinities created instantaneously, and the God who created them has to be outside of them. If he's limited by time, he's not God. The guy who created this computer is not in the computer. He's not running around in there changing the numbers on the screen, okay? The God who created this universe is outside of the universe. He's above it, beyond it, in it, through it. He's unaffected by it. So the concept that a spiritual force cannot have any effect on a material body, well then I guess you'd have to explain to me things like emotions and love and hatred and envy and jealousy and rationality. I mean, if your brain is just a random collection of chemicals that formed by chance over billions of years, how on earth can you trust your own reasoning processes and the thoughts that you think? Okay, so
do y'all want scientific proof that God is real? It is 7 o'clock in the morning and I have not slept. So y'all, I'm gonna need y'all to try and keep up with me on this, okay? I'm gonna give you a lot of information and I'm gonna try to keep it as simple as possible, okay? So we're gonna ride together because I can't sleep until I do this video. Have y'all ever heard of the theory of general relativity? I'm sure you have. It's what Einstein is famous for. In his calculations, he started to realize that the universe was not eternal the way that he always believed it was. It wasn't static. It had a beginning, a definite beginning. Now this leads us to the law of causality. Now the law of causality really is the fundamental law of not just science, but life. Everything that came to be with a beginning, every effect needs a cause. So Einstein clearly knew that if the universe had a beginning, it needed a cause. He found that information irritating. He said that himself. He didn't want to believe that the universe needed a cause. He didn't like the implications behind that. Because what could possibly cause the existence of this extremely precise, expansive universe? But at the end of the day, after trying to find a loophole to his own theory, because he didn't like the implications behind it so much, he had to just give up. The evidence backed up the fact that the universe was created. It had a beginning. And he later called that loophole that he attempted the biggest blunder of his life. Now let's go to the Big Bang Theory. Let me make something very clear, because I don't feel like I ever really learned this in school. The universe did not emerge out of any pre-existing material. It emerged from nothing. So all this stuff that I thought about the Big Bang, there was pre-existing matter floating around out there, and then it just happened to collide and bam, Big Bang. There was no space, no time, and no matter before the Big Bang. The universe emerged out of nothingness. What does that mean? Since it's impossible for the universe to be able to create itself because it didn't exist in order to be able to create itself, nature had no part in the creation of the universe. Nature had nothing to do with it. Nature and the universe itself was just a big effect that was caused by, what are we left with? We are left with an extremely powerful, extremely intelligent, precise, given the precision that our universe was created with, personal entity. Because impersonal entities are not capable of decision making, like the clear decisions that were made in order to create our universe and all of us, humans, animals, everything that God has created. The very powerful, intelligent, precise, personal entity. that is capable of existing outside of time, space, and matter. Guess who that sounds like? That can't be nothing but God. And for people that are like, okay, well, how do you know that it's like Yahweh? How do you know that it's like Christianity's God? Well, there's only one God, but I'm just going to give you your answer. There's a very famous astronomer named Robert Jastrow. His credentials as a scientist are impeccable. And he said himself, being agnostic, he's not even a Christian. He said that all of the essential elements of the Big Bang Theory line up with biblical creation. The creation of the universe happened at a definite moment in time, sharply, suddenly, in a flash of light and energy. That is biblical creation. Because this is how God works. God speaks something, and then science runs to catch up with what he said. If God says, let there be light, bam, it just happens. However it needs to happen, that's what's going to happen. People have got it kind of confused. People take science and they put it above God. Like science is somehow more reliable when science wouldn't exist without God. Because science doesn't create anything. Science studies creation. Scientists try and figure out what caused what. What function does this have? How does all of this work? This vast universe that we live in. How does it all work? Scientists try and figure that out. But scientists don't create nothing. Scientists discover things. But what is discovery? You know what happens if I discover something? You know what that means? That means that something is there that I didn't know was there, and I just saw it. That is what discovery is. When scientists say we just discovered a new planet, we just discovered a new species, they saw something that was already there that they didn't know was there until they just saw it. We just discovered something. But people act like science is God. Let me be very real with y'all for a second. We are just little tiny humans in this very dangerous universe. I don't know why humans be walking around acting like we're invincible or something, but we can only survive under very narrow conditions. Gravitational interaction between the moon and Earth has to be just right. If the sun were any closer to us, we'd be dead. If it were any further away from us, we'd be dead. God has given us those conditions on Earth. Why do you think when people go out into space, they really got to make sure everything's right? That spacecraft got to be right there. There can be no issues. Or else you get Apollo 13. You get astronauts almost dying out there in space because one little thing went wrong and led to a chain reaction that almost ended people's lives out there in the middle of space.